In a training hall deep in the mountains of feudal Japan, a young warrior named Haruto watched in awe as his senior, a swordsman named Noboru, performed the same downward strike for what seemed like the 1,000th time that month. The movement was so precise, so effortless, it appeared as if the sword moved itself. Frustrated, Haruto approached the master instructor after training. "Sensei, how long must I practice this single cut before I can learn the advanced techniques? Noboru makes it look so simple, yet I have been doing this for weeks and still feel clumsy." The master smiled and walked to a large stone at the edge of the dojo. Years of water had carved a deep groove into its surface. "Do you see this stone? The water that shaped it did not crash upon it once with great force. It fell one drop at a time, 10,000 times, 100,000 times, until the stone itself surrendered its form. Your sword must become like that water, not through a single brilliant effort, but through 10,000 deliberate strikes." This story captures a truth that the samurai understood deeply, but modern learners often miss. True mastery is not built through talent, inspiration, or even hard work alone. It is built through a specific type of repetition that rewrites not just your skills, but your very nervous system. The principle the master was teaching Haruto is what we might call the 10,000 strikes method. This was not about mindlessly swinging a sword until your arms grew tired. It was about something far more precise and infinitely more powerful. The samurai developed a training methodology that modern science is only now beginning to fully understand. When they practiced a technique 10,000 times, they were not simply memorizing a movement. They were encoding it so deeply into their neurology that it became automatic, effortless, and permanent. Consider how Noboru learned his perfect strike. In his first 1,000 repetitions, he was in what we now call the cognitive stage. His mind was fully engaged with every detail. Where should his feet be positioned? How tightly should he grip the handle? What angle should the blade follow? Each movement required conscious thought, and mistakes were frequent. His master watched carefully during this phase, correcting his posture, adjusting his grip, ensuring that what he was encoding was correct technique, not flawed habit. This is the critical difference between the samurai method and simple repetition. Quality always preceded quantity. A student never practiced alone until the fundamentals were verified as correct by a master's eye. By the time Noboru reached his third 1,000 strikes, something shifted. He entered what modern researchers call the associative stage. He no longer needed to think about where his feet should be, his body remembered. His conscious mind could now focus on more subtle elements: the timing of his breath with the movement, the precise moment to accelerate the blade, the feeling of centeredness in his hara, his body's center of power. Mistakes still happened, but now he could feel them immediately and self-correct. His body was developing what the samurai called mushin, the state where the action happens without the interference of thought. Somewhere between the 7th and 10th 1,000 repetitions, Noboru achieved something remarkable. The strike became autonomous. His sword could find its perfect path even if he were awakened from sleep. The technique had moved from his conscious mind into his muscle memory, into the deep patterns of his nervous system. At this stage, the movement actually required less energy than it did when he was learning it. The unnecessary tensions had dissolved. The inefficient compensations had been smoothed away. What remained was the pure essence of the technique, performed with minimal effort and maximum effect. The samurai understood something that contradicts how most people approach learning today. We live in an age that celebrates variety, novelty, and constant change. We are told to try many things, to explore broadly, to never stay too long in one place. Yet, the path to genuine mastery runs in the opposite direction. It runs through the deliberate repetition of fundamental movements until they become not something you do, but something you are. When a master swordsman faces an opponent, he does not consciously decide to perform technique number 7 from Kata 3. The situation presents itself, and his body responds with the appropriate action faster than thought could ever move. This is not instinct in the sense of something you are born with. This is instinct that you create through 10,000 deliberate repetitions. But here is where most people misunderstand this principle. They hear 10,000 repetitions and imagine someone mindlessly going through the same motion like a robot. Nothing could be further from the samurai method. Each of those 10,000 strikes was performed with complete presence. The practitioner was not thinking about yesterday's training or tomorrow's test. His entire awareness was focused on this strike, right now, in this moment. This quality of attention is what the samurai called Zanshin, the continuation of awareness that extends through every aspect of practice. Modern neuroscience now confirms what the samurai discovered through centuries of practice. When you repeat a movement with focused attention, you are literally rewiring your brain. The neural pathways that control that movement become stronger, faster, and more efficient. The myelin sheath, a fatty coating around nerve fibers, thickens with each deliberate repetition, allowing signals to travel faster and more reliably. This is why the 10,000th repetition looks so different from the first. It is not just that the practitioner has learned the movement. Their nervous system has been fundamentally rebuilt to execute it perfectly. The samurai also understood something about the relationship between fundamentals and advanced techniques that modern learners often miss. There is a temptation, especially when learning feels slow, to rush past the basics and move on to more exciting, complex techniques. Yet the masters insisted that even after decades of training, even after mastering the most sophisticated strategies, the advanced practitioner must return daily to the fundamental strikes. Why? Because excellence in anything is not about knowing 1,000 different techniques. It is about knowing 10 fundamental techniques so deeply, so completely, that you can apply them perfectly in 10,000 different situations. Think about this in the context of your own learning. Whatever skill you are trying to develop, whether it is a musical instrument, a sport, a language, or a professional expertise, the samurai method offers a clear path forward. Identify the most fundamental elements of that skill, not the flashy, impressive parts, but the basic building blocks that everything else depends upon. Then commit to repeating those fundamentals with complete attention, not once or twice, but until they become effortless, until they require no conscious thought, until they emerge perfectly even under pressure, distraction, or stress. This requires something that modern culture often lacks: patience with the process itself. We have been conditioned to expect rapid results, to measure progress in days or weeks rather than months or years. Yet the samurai knew that anything worth mastering required the willingness to show up day after day, often with no visible progress, trusting that beneath the surface, something profound was happening. The stone does not visibly change after 1 drop of water, or 10 drops, or even 100. But 10,000 drops later, it has been transformed. There is another element of the 10,000 strikes principle that deserves attention. The samurai did not practice in isolation. A master or senior practitioner observed their training, providing immediate feedback when technique began to drift. This prevented the development of flawed habits. Modern research on deliberate practice confirms this insight. People who train without expert feedback often plateau, repeating the same mistakes thousands of times and wondering why they do not improve. The feedback loop is what keeps each repetition moving you closer to mastery, rather than simply reinforcing whatever patterns you started with. So how do you apply the 10,000 strikes principle to your own life? First, identify one fundamental skill within your domain that underpins everything else. If you are learning to write, it might be constructing clear sentences. If you are learning business, it might be active listening. If you are learning an instrument, it might be playing scales with perfect timing. Second, commit to practicing that fundamental skill every single day with complete attention, not while watching television or thinking about other things, with the same presence a samurai brought to his sword. Third, seek expert feedback regularly to ensure that what you are encoding is correct technique. And finally, trust the process. Trust that if you show up consistently with quality attention, the 10,000th repetition will reveal capabilities that the first repetition could not even imagine. The young warrior Haruto took his master's lesson to heart. Every morning for the next 3 years, before the sun rose, he practiced that single downward strike. 1 strike, 10 strikes, 100 strikes, 1,000 strikes. His friends laughed at his dedication to something so simple while they practiced more exciting techniques. But Haruto remembered the stone shaped by water. Then one day, during a competitive demonstration, Haruto performed that strike. The other warriors, including those who had mocked his basic practice, fell silent. The movement was so precise, so powerful, so effortless that it seemed to contain all the advanced techniques within its simplicity. His master smiled and nodded. The stone had surrendered its form. Mastery had been achieved, not through talent or intensity, but through 10,000 patient, deliberate, fully present repetitions. This is the gift of the 10,000 strikes principle. It is not quick, it is not easy, and it is not glamorous. But it is real, it works. It creates permanent mastery that cannot be shaken by pressure, time, or circumstance. The question is not whether this method leads to excellence. Centuries of samurai prove that it does. The only question is whether you have the patience and discipline to let the water shape the stone. Thank you for watching.